$13 billion supercarrier was burning from the inside out. A fire erupted deep inside the ship's laundry room. It burned for over 30 hours. Over 200 sailors were treated for smoke inhalation, and more than 600 were left without beds, forced to sleep on steel floors and mess hall tables. 5 weeks later, that same ship, the USS Gerald R. crossed back through the Suez Canal and re-entered the Red Sea. Nuclear plant online, catapults armed, launching combat sorties for Operation Epic Fury, as if nothing had happened. When a warship suffers that kind of internal devastation, the standard response is to withdraw over 5,000 nautical miles back to a dry dock in Norfolk, Virginia for months of repairs. But the Ford didn't go home, which raises the question, how does a 100,000-ton warship that was burning for 30 hours manage to return to a combat zone in just 5 weeks without ever seeing a shipyard? If that engineering problem interests you, subscribe to Navy Decoded. The fire was eventually extinguished, but the real enemy was never the fire itself. The real enemy was the clock. Every day the Ford was out of the fight, the Red Sea had no American air cover. The only other carrier in the region, the Lincoln, was stationed in the Arabian Sea, too far away to fill the gap. A replacement was coming. The USS George H.W. Bush had departed Norfolk, but it was routing the long way around, Cape of Good Hope, up through the Indian Ocean, to avoid the exact threats the Ford had been fighting. It would not arrive for weeks. No replacement, no coverage. The clock was running, and we were losing. But before we can understand how the ship was fixed, we need to understand what the fire actually did to it. The fire started deep in the stern of the ship, inside the main laundry compartment. In a house, fire spreads by consuming wood and drywall. In a 100,000-ton warship built from HY-80 high-yield steel, the physics of combustion change entirely. A carrier is essentially a sealed, multi-level steel labyrinth. When a fire breaks out, the steel bulkheads don't burn, they conduct. The extreme heat acts like an oven, driven by the laws of thermodynamics. HY-80 steel has high thermal conductivity. When a fire reaches 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in one compartment, the steel bulkhead absorbs and transfers that heat directly into the next room. You don't need a hole in the wall for the fire to spread. The radiating heat from the steel alone can trigger auto-ignition, causing paint to spontaneously combust, melting the rubber insulation off critical electrical cables, and starting secondary fires in rooms where there is no actual flame. The steel does not burn, it becomes the fire. To combat this, sailors have to establish what the Navy calls fire boundaries. This means standing in neighboring, unburned rooms, continuously blasting the bare steel walls with seawater just to extract the thermal energy and keep the metal below the ignition threshold. But there is no professional fire department to call in the middle of the ocean. On a U.S. Navy warship, every sailor, from cooks and mechanics to aviation engineers, is a firefighter. Within minutes of the general quarters alarm, hundreds of sailors abandoned their daily stations. They strapped on heavy, self-contained breathing apparatuses, grabbed hoses, and descended into the dark. What followed was a brutal, 30-hour war of attrition. Fighting a fire inside a ship is nothing like fighting one on land. There are no windows to break for ventilation. The smoke has nowhere to go. Damage control teams had to crawl through pitch-black, smoke-choked corridors, relying entirely on naval firefighters' thermal imagers just to see their own hands. The temperature in the main fire zone reached hundreds of degrees, turning the water from their own hoses into scalding steam that cooked them inside their heavy protective gear. 30 to 45 minutes. That is all an SCBA tank gives you. So the damage control teams ran a relentless, exhausting relay race. Teams would push into the inferno, fight until their low air alarms screamed, and then blindly trace their hoses back out to swap tanks with the next team. For 30 straight hours, they dragged heavy, water-filled hoses up and down narrow, vertical ladder wells. They waded through knee-deep pools of a hazardous mixture, corrosive salt water, chemical fire suppressants, and the constant, terrifying threat of live, high-voltage electrical cables sparking in the water. They are the only reason this $13 billion ship didn't suffer a chain reaction that could have reached the aviation fuel lines. But the victory came at a severe physical cost. The fire gutted several berthing compartments. Over 600 sailors were left without a place to sleep, forced to drag whatever blankets survived and sleep on the hard steel floors of the mess decks and hangar bays. The fire was out. The ship was alive, but it was no longer whole. To fix a 100,000-ton warship that has just suffered a 30-hour structural fire, the standard operating procedure is to put it in a dry dock. A proper dry dock gives engineers months of controlled access. Every bulkhead opened, every cable inspected, every square foot of steel verified under ideal conditions. But there was no dry dock within 5,000 miles, and the clock would not wait. So we traded certainty for speed. We stripped away the safety margin of a full shipyard inspection. In exchange, we bought back 3 weeks of combat presence, accepting the risk that structural damage we could not see might still be hiding in the steel. Days after the fire was extinguished, the Ford docked at Naval Support Activity Suda Bay in Crete, Greece. No other navy on the planet can perform this kind of forward surgery. If the Chinese or Russian Navy experienced a similar disaster, their ship would be forced to return to its home port, completely abandoning the theater of war. We do not have that luxury. We have the FDRMC. The Forward Deployed Regional Maintenance Center is not a physical shipyard. It is an agile, deployable logistics network. Headquartered in Naples, Italy, with detachments across Europe and the Middle East, its philosophy is simple. If the ship cannot go to the shipyard, bring the shipyard to the ship. The moment the fire was extinguished, we activated Tiger teams, rapid response units made up of Naval Sea Systems Command engineers and civilian contractors. They flew immediately to the Mediterranean with specialized diagnostic equipment. They boarded the smoke-scarred vessel not just to clean up, but to conduct critical metallurgical assessments. When HY-80 steel is subjected to extreme heat, its crystalline structure can fundamentally change. The quenched and tempered steel loses its temper and load-bearing integrity. Engineers deployed ultrasonic scanners and magnetic particle inspections to map out microfractures hidden within the bulkheads. They also had to meticulously trace and recertify the electrical grid. A Ford-class carrier cannot safely operate its A-1B nuclear reactors if the secondary electrical distribution system is compromised by melted cables. A Greek island became a shipyard in a matter of days, but repairing the steel was only half the problem. The fire had destroyed the living conditions for nearly a tenth of the crew. Because the laundry facility and personal lockers were reduced to ash, the Navy executed a massive emergency resupply. We did not just order new supplies from a warehouse, we cannibalized our own future. Nearly 1,000 mattresses were physically stripped from the future USS John F. Kennedy, CVN-79, a multi-billion-dollar sister ship sitting unfinished in a shipyard in Virginia. Those mattresses, along with replacement clothing and personal gear, were loaded onto cargo planes and flown halfway across the world. That is not logistics. That is desperation dressed as capability. After a final maintenance stop in Split, Croatia, 10 days of actual port time spread across just over 3 weeks, the surgery was complete. The Ford was patched. The question is whether it was healed. Just 3 weeks after docking in Greece, the Ford crossed back through the Suez Canal. The A-1B nuclear plant was untouched. The electromagnetic aircraft launch systems were operational. The Combat Information Center was fully staffed. The ship that had been crippled by fire was now launching strike sorties over the Red Sea around the clock. Returning to combat with a scarred ship isn't a symbol of stubbornness, it is the brutal language of deterrence. When adversaries saw CVN-78 re-enter the area of operations, the message was clear. Even when our ship is wounded and our sailors are sleeping on steel floors, this vessel can still put warplanes armed with precision munitions over your heads. But deterrence is not free, and physics always collects. To understand the true toll of this deployment, you have to look beyond the 30-hour fire. The fire was just the most visible symptom of a much larger, invisible enemy, mechanical friction. Because there was no replacement carrier available, the Ford was forced to stay on station for nearly 300 days, the longest continuous U.S. aircraft carrier deployment in the post-Vietnam era. A warship is not a perpetual motion machine. We designed every system on board for sprint tempo, deploy hard, return, reset in a shipyard. We never designed them for a marathon. By forcing the Ford to run one anyway, we pushed our most advanced systems to the edge of their engineering limits. Take emails. This is not your grandfather's steam catapult. It is essentially a linear induction motor, an electromagnetic rail that stores roughly 122 megajoules of energy and releases it in a single burst to accelerate a 60,000-pound fighter jet from 0 to 130 knots in under 3 seconds. But physics demands a toll. Every time that electromagnetic pulse fires, it generates immense thermal and electrical stress on the stator coils and high-voltage switches. When we launch 75 planes a day for nearly 300 days without a shipyard reset, we are dealing with electrical arcing that pits the power conversion equipment and thermal expansion that threatens to warp the linear armature. The same applies to the Advanced Arresting Gear, AAG. Catching a landing aircraft means instantly absorbing millions of foot-pounds of kinetic energy using a water twister and an induction motor. Over thousands of traps, the water gets superheated, the cables stretch, and the mechanical dampeners degrade. The friction is relentless. To keep the launch rails operational, engineers cannibalize parts from backup power conversion systems. We were eating our own spare parts to stay in the fight. Externally, the friction was even worse. A carrier does not fight alone. It requires a continuous umbilical cord of underway replenishment ships delivering JP-5 aviation fuel and precision munitions. UNREP requires 2 massive ships sailing perfectly parallel at 15 knots, just 150 feet apart in the open ocean, connected by high-tension steel cables with complex hydraulic tensioning winches constantly adjusting the slack. When we extended the deployment past 300 days, those hydraulic systems and tensioning motors were pushed past their thermal and mechanical limits. The constant load cycling degraded seals and burned out the heavy-duty winches on the supply ships. By refusing to leave the Red Sea, we didn't just exhaust the Ford's crew, we stretched the entire global supply chain to its breaking point. The logistical fleet was pushed so hard that the supply ships themselves began suffering mechanical breakdowns. The Ford was fighting adversaries in the Red Sea, but the US Navy was fighting the laws of physics. When you look at the 30-hour fire, the brilliant makeshift shipyard in Greece, and the rapid return to combat, a deeper question emerges. If the Ford is a $13 billion marvel of nuclear engineering, why did it suffer a major fire in a laundry room in the first place? The answer is not the fire. The answer is the math behind the fire. The US Navy runs on a cycle called the Optimized Fleet Response Plan, OFRP. The promise is simple. 1/3 of the carriers are deployed, 1/3 are in deep maintenance, and 1/3 are training. 36 months per rotation. The math guarantees that every carrier gets the downtime its steel, its electronics, and its crew physically require. The Red Sea broke that math. There was no other carrier ready to take the Ford's place, so we kept it on station nearly 300 days. Now look at the full picture. The damage control teams fought a 30-hour war of attrition to save their ship. They crawled through the dark. They breathed through tanks that lasted 40 minutes. They won. But the brutal truth is, they should never have had to fight that fire. A carrier on a standard rotation cycle gets inspected, reset, and maintained on schedule. Systems that wear get replaced before they fail. A laundry compartment fire on a well-rested ship is caught in minutes, not fought for 30 hours. The FDRMC turned a Greek island into a shipyard in 3 days. Brilliant. But we traded the certainty of a proper dry dock inspection for the speed of a field repair. We accepted risks we cannot fully quantify. The unfinished sister ship in Virginia was stripped of 1,000 mattresses because the ship that was supposed to be resting was still fighting. And the friction never stopped. Emails arcing, AAG overheating, UNREP winches burning out, spare parts cannibalized from backup systems. Every one of those failures is a direct consequence of running a sprint machine at marathon tempo. The fire was not a malfunction, it was the invoice. The OFRP was built on a simple promise: 1/3 fights, 1/3 heals, 1/3 trains. When the math breaks, everything downstream breaks: the steel, the sailors, and eventually, the fleet. The forward repair was not a demonstration of invincibility, it was a field tourniquet on a wound that requires surgery. The US Navy is not fighting one war, it is fighting two. The first is in the Red Sea. The second is the structural collapse of its own readiness cycle. And the second one does not make the news. Before we close, the broken readiness cycles are a failure of naval doctrine. But the survival of the Ford was a triumph of sheer human grit. If you respect the 30-hour fight of the damage control teams who crawled through the dark to save their ship, type "proud" in the comments. Their story deserves to be honored. In 5 weeks, we took a crippled, fire-damaged 100,000-ton aircraft carrier, ripped mattresses from an unfinished sister ship, flew structural engineers to a Greek island, patched the hull in a Croatian port, and put it back to war. No other Navy on this planet can do that. But here's the question no one wants to answer. How many times can you perform battlefield surgery on the same patient before the patient stops getting up? If this is what resilience looks like, are we proving our strength or revealing exactly how close we are to breaking?